So my name's Simon, as you heard, and that's me when I was 9 years old, 10 years old. Maybe I just turned 10 years old. And the reason why I wanted this slide initially was just to try and make you think a little bit about the passage of time and the choices you make, and what you want to do with your life. What are your interests? What is your interaction with the world going to be? So I ended up being a spokesperson. So I was the voice of the diplomatic service of Great Britain, of the United Kingdom. I was the spokesperson for this man. Does anyone know who he is? Yes. Not the grown-ups at the back. Yes? Johnson. Boris Johnson, yes. So I was his spokesperson for 2 years. Not a very easy job. I think maybe some at the back will kind of understand a bit more than those at the front. And so it was my job to do lots of things. My job was to explain what Britain was doing. My job was to explain what the diplomatic service was doing. My job was to explain what he was doing and trying to do. So that's a photo. I should tell you a bit about the photo. So that's at the United Nations in New York, the Security Council. And I think I can't remember exactly what the meeting was about, but it was obviously, it was quite a high profile meeting. This is the press pen outside. So often the ministers or ambassadors, they will make their statements. The reason why I'm looking very unhappy is because I'm looking at this chap who is a very, I don't know if you know the word notorious, a very difficult journalist who covers the United Nations, always asks slightly crazy questions. And so I was looking at him, waiting for him to say something not very constructive. So communications is one part of my job, or my former job, but a really, really important job, part of government and our democracy, frankly, because communication is conversation and understanding, and it's at the heart of how a society works together. How truthful is the conversation? Where is the evidence for what people are saying? If you were to speak to a supporter of Donald Trump, they would say CNN is not trustworthy at all. They're biased because they are mainstream media, and of course you're aware of the division at the moment, particularly in America. Yes. And there is all over the world, actually. It's not just the United States. It's the same in Britain. It's the same across Europe. There are forces who are trying to discredit certain media outlets. So one thing I will say about that whole conversation is that having a conversation about the trustworthiness of news sources, I think is a good one. I think it's a good one. I think people need to be aware that opinions are coming from somewhere. Just because it's on CNN doesn't mean it's a fact, right? It is but I personally do believe that CNN is a very professional. I have a lot of friends who work for CNN, and they're not always perfect. No organization is perfect, right? But they do have very professional journalists who are very experienced, who are trying to give I believe, not a massively political take on events. Now, it's different when you're covering domestic politics, because just by reporting something, the other side will say, well, you reported it, therefore, you're biased. Or not reporting it, then you're biased. If you speak to someone, maybe someone you know a bit says, oh, I've heard this about, maybe it's gossip, right, at school. You won't believe what's happened, this has happened. Really? You go, really? That person did that? That's happened? And you kind of, do you believe it straight away? No, it depends on who's telling you the information. And over time you make a judgment. Is this the kind of person that tells you something, are they reliable? Do they turn out to be right? Do they turn out? So what I'm trying to do really is just explain that my job when I did that was not to pretend that I knew everything. It was not to pretend that we were right and others are wrong. It's merely to give the point of view of the United Kingdom. And I work for someone in a professional capacity. It doesn't mean that I believed everything he said, because I was an official in the government. But it's about communication in government, in the work that I did, I believe, is about explaining, it's about giving the point of view and using evidence to back it up, but also not pretending that it's the absolute truth. And I think that is something that's becoming quite difficult these days in terms of the media and in terms of our politics. It's to understand that there are other points of view. It's to understand that that you need to verify, you need to check, you need to think about where you get your sources, just as you do in the real world. You don't just because someone on the street says, "Hey, you should buy this." Why should you do that and you won't? Then why should you do that if it's online? And of course, it's very seductive. It's the apps and they're designed to be addictive. They're designed to be, and I know this because I'm there as well. I'm on Twitter going, "Oh, I want to know what all these politicians are saying," because I'm sad. But I want to know, what they're saying, what's going on, because that's what I'm interested in, and it gives me what I want. So I stay hooked, and I sometimes can't get away. So several things there, I guess. It's an explanation of, well, first of all, it's English practice, so well done for listening to me. And if you understood most of what I said, you've done very well. Secondly, to just tell you a little bit about what I've done, which is very interesting and genuinely very interesting. And some people want to be businessmen, entrepreneurs. That's fantastic. Do it. Do that. Some people want to play a role in society, public service. That's also great. My advice would be, whatever it is that you do, commit to it 100%. Don't just sort of, I might do this, I might do that. Just go for it. And I personally believe that public service, and I think there's some, I think journalism is public service as well. I do believe that very strongly. I think a career in the media is not well paid at all, despite what you think. You think someone's on television, therefore they're paid really well. They're not. But playing a role in your country, in Bulgaria, and also in the European Union, and it was great, by the way. Schengen, I don't know if you've thought about this, but now Bulgaria is in Schengen. So I had my passport controlled to come into Bulgaria in Vienna. It was just great. It's just fantastic. I just love it. Thinking about also the jobs you can have in Brussels. I had my first job was in the European Parliament. It was fantastic working with before Bulgaria was in the European Union. It was a wonderful thing. So think about your careers, think about what you're interested in, and then think about a bit about communication. What am I reading? Who wants me to read this? How does it influence my thinking, my decisions? I think there just needs to be, you need to be aware of the fact that it is a space where there's a lot of people who want you to think a certain way. I'm not saying you have to disagree with everyone. What I'm saying is, think for yourselves, verify, and just be aware. So the job of a communications director. So my last job in government was I was communications director to the British Prime Minister. So that meant that I worked very closely with the Prime Minister to coordinate explaining the Prime Minister's vision to everyone in the world. So I had to work with the Prime Minister and other advisors to explain to the British people, the British public, the electorate, what the agenda was. Also to explain to all of our allies and not so allies what we want, what our role was in the world. So there is any country, every country has this. There is a whole infrastructure, whole teams all over government whose job it is to explain government, because if there's no one to explain it, then no one knows what's going on. So it was my job to come up with a plan to explain what the Prime Minister and the British government was doing. So my job was to explain, was to help explain, because that's what you do in a democracy. You have to be accountable, you have to explain, you have to tell people what you're doing, why you're doing it. You need, because you need popular support. Well, you need support for that. Sometimes there's no popular support. Sometimes things can be very unpopular, but that's even more reason to explain why you're doing something if it's difficult. You then have to say, "This, you won't like this, but I'm doing it because this is important." I chose that job because I think it was so two things. I wanted to be a journalist. So I liked the idea of finding things that I thought were important to lots of people and writing about them. So I liked the idea of using my brain to try and work out, here is a story, and this matters to lots of people. I quite like that. And I like the process. There's a challenge, right? You think something is important to lots of people. Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's not important to lots of people. But you work out over time, and as you get more senior as a journalist, you can have an effect on the conversation. You can have an effect on the conversation, and I think that's it's quite a privileged position to be in. There's a lot. You're responsible. You have to be quite responsible with that. But it's exciting, right? You get to know lots of people. You get to talk to everyone. I mean, when I was a journalist, I used to travel all over the world to speak to people, to do stories, and that's a very exciting thing to be paid to do. To talk to people, write stories. So that's quite that was quite a basic one. And because I'd been a journalist. Actually, I stopped being a journalist. This is maybe a little bit, how should I put it? A little bit cynical. So I don't know if you know the word cynical. So it's a little bit real. It's a bit realist. So I had been a journalist for a long time, and I was very idealistic. I thought my journalism was going to help help people understand better what politics was about. And I still believe that. I think there are a lot of journalists who want to do that. But after a while, I found that the newspapers I worked for really wanted scandal, shock. Someone's bad, this is bad, policy's bad, this person's bad. And I'm talking about very well-known newspapers, in the United Kingdom and internationally. And I felt it was overly negative. It was too negative. It was too much about destruction, not enough about trying to build something. So then I made the change to become a government spokesperson. So some people would say I was on the right side when I was a journalist because I was fighting the machine. And then some people say, well, you're in the machine, but the machine is a positive machine that's trying to make things better, and it's the journalists who are trying to knock things down. And I'm in the middle of that because I've done both jobs. So the way I thought about it was, when I was a journalist, I used to hit the government. I used to throw things at the government, and then when I was in the government, I used to catch them. And sometimes I used to catch my own stories. Sometimes some of the things I'd started, I was dealing with as a defending the government. I'd been a journalist, and that was my contribution. That was the thing I understood. And in government, I liked explaining things. I liked dealing with the media. Journalists are great people, by the way. Not just, there's a lot of journalists in here. Journalists are great people, right? Because journalists are people, a bit like diplomats. You kind of, and others. You really have to enjoy talking to people. You can't do the job sat in a room just on a computer. So if you like being out there and you like, so communications is a great thing. Also, it gives you. You have a special role in government. So this is again maybe for the slightly older audience. It's not your job to nod along and to sort of go, yes, boss, you're right. The boss goes, this policy is the best policy there is, and then you are going to then explain it to everyone outside. It's kind of your job to say, no, it's a rubbish policy, and if it goes outside, you're going to get killed. And so often you have to be the difficult person in the room. When everyone else is nodding, often you're the one going, no, hang on, no. And that's very challenging and lots of fun. Well, I think you can see that things have changed. So there's two answers. I'm going to give you a diplomatic answer. Things are changing and things aren't changing. So I think so we have some evidence for this, right? So we already had 4 years of Trump between 16 and 20. So, we've already had the first Trump administration. And everyone said at the time it's going to be crazy and da-da. Actually, in the end, there was a lot of, it was different, but it wasn't hugely radical. Of course, this one is much more radical. He is very happy to be very disruptive in lots of ways, right? Internally within the United States, in terms of the US's position as the economic economic powerhouse of the world, as the leading trading country in the world, and he is willing to make very radical, unsettling decisions to satisfy his voters. So he's saying, I'm doing this, I don't care about the rest of the world, I'm doing what I think the people voted me in to do. Now, where does that leave us? Where does that leave Europe? Not just the European Union, but Europe, including Britain. I think it leaves us in a very tricky space. I think there's one thing I would say is that it's not like we could always rely on the United States before and now we can't. I think it's ridiculous to suggest that we were always very close to the United States under previous administrations, Republican or Democrat. I think we've always had quite a tricky relationship with America. To give you an example, Britain, although people think Britain and America are really super close, and yes, we are super close in many respects, military, intelligence sharing, yes, but Britain was still paying debts from the Second World War until not so long ago. It was a very commercial relationship. America wanted its money. America's always been very clear about its self-interest. So I think what Trump is doing is unsettling, but I think in many respects, there are things I can't criticize. I think it's absolutely right that Europe and Britain, and of course Germany has made huge commitments on this to improve its own defense. I don't think it's, I personally believe that this should have happened a long time ago, that it shouldn't have been Trump that's been pushing for Europe to spend more on defense. I think that's been very clear. It should have done that a long time ago. So there are things that are kind of unsettling, but aren't necessarily wrong, I think. But it's impossible to predict. I mean, the people I speak to who are close to the American administration now, they don't know what Trump is going to say and do. And they're in the government. So it's hard for us. So the unpredictability is the problem, I think, the biggest problem. And also there's a lot of meddling in internal politics. He's talking a lot about the internal politics of the United Kingdom, the internal politics of Germany. He's talking about the internal politics of countries where traditionally you don't get involved in those. And he's being supportive also. He's being very selective in his support for certain parties, which I believe is not helpful. So AI, obviously, as you know, is replacing a lot of work. You know, there are things where AI can very, very quickly summarize, transcribe. It can carry out, with some intelligence, quite mechanical functions. So, for example, you know, I was reading an article in a publication called Forbes the other day, and as I started reading it, I thought, this is a really boring article. And I was reading down it, and this is a publication that's quite a professional publication. And as I started reading it, I realized, I know why it's boring. It was written by AI. It was very mechanical. It was very simplistic in its, there was no character, there was no personality. There was also no argument, really. It was a sort of list of facts, written technically correctly, but with no emotion, no argument, nothing behind it. Which gives away my answer, I think. So AI is already, and you're using it, and that's incredible. And I think that, you know, AI will become an even greater parts of our lives and our working lives. I use it as well. I use it if I want to know something. I use it to summarize documents. I use it when I have questions on particularly legislation and laws, and I want to understand a system that's complicated. You know, obviously AI can just tell you straight away, summarize it in a really nice, neat way. Now, the question for us, and particularly for your generation more than me, is to what extent is AI going to replace people? People working, people thinking. And the answer is, I don't know, and you don't know. We don't know, because we don't know how advanced the AI is going to get. But what I do know is that even if the AI is really smart, the human being is the human being, and the human mind is the human mind, and emotions are emotions, and brains are brains, and capacity. And so I think what still won't be changed by AI is how you think about the world, how you judge the world, and how you verify what you see and what you hear. So yes, AI is going to change, I think, the speed with which you can do things. I think it's going to change you know, the ability to use knowledge, to apply knowledge, and to verify, but it's not going to change human judgment, in my opinion. And human judgment is really what communication's about. So, you know, I think that no matter how sophisticated the machines and the AI, nothing will replace a human being to human being interaction and a human explanation and a human rationale for doing things or saying things. Future journalism. I think it's the same. I think it's basically the same answer. I think AI will not. I'm thinking to myself, AI won't be able to work out emotionally what people care about and will want to see and read. But I'm also wrong, because I'm saying that, but it can, because it knows what people are clicking on and what people are reading. So maybe I'm wrong. I think maybe what AI can't do, AI is, AI can tell what past behavior is. It's becoming better at predicting future behavior, but I think AI can't lead on the emotional future. I don't think it can. I believe, I hope, that it won't be able to predict where human emotion will go and human judgment will go. My belief is that actually the machine won't be able to. The machine can't replace the human brain, and I think it's the human brain that the humanity is not something that AI, I believe, will replace. And I believe it's the humanity that people want, the connectivity, the humanity that people want when they read something. They want it to be real, not simply a program. Even if the program is informative, it's why people like watching people on television. Why are there news reporters, Antoinette? People want to watch Antoinette. They want to hear from Antoinette. Antoinette's been around. Antoinette is very experienced. It's like I feel like I know this person. I've been listening and watching them for years. I trust this person. I believe them because they've been around, because they're experienced, because so those things I don't think can be replaced by AI. In Britain, we have a problem with TikTok. It's the same as the United States. TikTok is a Chinese platform. There is nothing technically wrong with it being a Chinese platform, but the nature of the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese state and the Chinese private sector and business is that everything is linked. So it's very hard to differentiate something that looks like it's cultural, commercial, from the state of China. And TikTok being a Chinese platform, there are concerns that it's used as a backdoor for information, for data gathering, and potentially for espionage as well. So, for example, the US system has completely banned TikTok because of those concerns. In the UK, I'm not quite sure where we are at the moment, but certainly at one point it was completely banned from the United Kingdom for us to use the platform, to have the app on our devices, but it is very popular and it is an incredible way of getting messages across to people. And I think that's now changed. I think the British government is using TikTok now in a particular way, but in a kind of quite a safe way, so that the app itself is not on every government official's phone. But TikTok is, it's very clever, it's very smart. The format is amazing. It's been very successful, and I think, ideally, yes, we should all communicate. We should use the platforms, government spokespeople, politicians, democratically elected. You don't have to be democratically elected, but representatives, members of parliament, countries that don't have democratically elected people. They should be communicating with their people and their audiences. And it's hard to criticize TikTok as a platform because it's so successful. When I moved from journalism to the government in about 14 years ago, everything was still very much press release, statement, that goes to journalists. The journalists then put it in the mainstream media, newspapers or broadcast, and websites online. That was the format. I think the explosion in social media means it's an opportunity and a threat for politicians and public servants. So the way politicians think is, I can get my message out without having to get journalists in the middle I don't have to convince the journalists to then get my message out. I can put it out directly, unfiltered. And that's what Donald Trump does. That's what Boris did very well. So Boris did these little videos, which were very, very popular because they'd be 50 seconds, 60 seconds. Hey, I'm Boris, I'm standing here, I'm going to tell you what I think is important. And people would watch them. So the advantage is that you can communicate very directly, if you're a good performer as a politician or you don't have to be a politician, you could be a government official, a diplomat, anything. You can get your message across really, really in a sort of human way using social media. The criticism is that, that some people see it as a way to avoid the scrutiny of the media. And, for example, like Trump, Trump doesn't have to convince CNN to report something. He just puts it out on Truth Social and then Twitter X, and then it's out. So anything he says, he doesn't really need to speak to journalists. And of course, journalists don't like this. Journalists hate this because journalists think they're very important. And sometimes they are important. Sometimes they're not that important. Again, it depends. There's no hard and fast rules. But there's egos. Journalists want to be part of the process, and they're being cut out a little bit. But social media has changed everything, absolutely. And I think mostly for the better, because people have to justify themselves. People have to explain. And I think more explanation and more justification is a good thing, not a bad thing. And I think in the past, politicians and people could hide behind people like me. And I would answer the question, but not really answer the question. And they didn't have to explain themselves to anyone. They could just, So I think it's a good thing. In a way, the technology makes it more extreme, much faster, and gives anyone the ability to join the conversation. But in essence, I don't think it's different from the last 2,000 years of Western democratic discourse, or Western political discourse, I should say, whether it's Greece or the Roman Senate, in the sense that everyone can shout in a room, anyone can shout in a room, but the people who make the best arguments and can provide evidence are the ones who will be listened to. Now, sometimes the arguments will be very persuasive, very seductive, and you sometimes hear these from people who make bigger promises, but then there's verification. There's like, well, what proof do you have for this? Do you deliver on this, on the message? You're promising something big that sounds really great, but what's the truth behind it? I think the basic conversation, in my opinion, hasn't changed. It's just that there is a much bigger forum, but there is still a forum with voices shouting at each other, and then the ones who come up with the best, not just the best arguments, but the arguments that can be based in fact, that can be evidenced, I think are the most persuasive, and I hope are the most persuasive. But what's a fact? What is a truth? So we're getting down to, and that is subjective as well. Some person might find something an important fact, another person doesn't think it's relevant. But it's a sophisticated. It is difficult, and I think the important point is to just try and think that there are different points. I mean, for example, I absolutely, I will defend other people's rights to say something I disagree with. That's kind of one of the principles of democracy, in a sense, of a democratic free media, right? I may disagree with you, but I don't disagree with the principle of you being able to give your point of view. And so I think there are some, just as with elections, I may not like the result of this election, but I've agreed to the principle of there being elections, so I can't complain about it. I think I'm moving off your points, but I'm talking about the basic principles that actually, if there's going to be a conversation, you're often going to disagree with it. You're often not going to like it, but at least there's a conversation taking place. And in some societies, particularly, I mentioned China again, communist China, the level of censorship, although a lot of people now circumvent that with VPNs and all the rest of it. At least there is a conversation, and in lots of parts of the world today, and times gone by, there wasn't that kind of conversation. Don't take things at face value. If someone says, that, that's an elephant. Well, I don't know. I mean, it could be an elephant. I mean, you could have something wrong with your eyes. I mean, check. Use your judgment. Use your own brain. But I think the important thing is just to think about it, to consider. And I would say also, I think we have a real problem. Again, it's getting a little bit political. What I don't like, quite passionately, about the current political situation and discourse, not extremism of political, I'm not talking about political views, I'm just talking about the extremism of the unacceptance of other points of view. You know, I can disagree really strongly with something, but I'm still going to understand that that is a view that is acceptable, that can be made, that should be made. I don't want to completely. It's about understanding that it's about respect for other people. Frankly, it's actually about respect. You can disagree with someone, but still respect their right to believe something and to say something. So, what is truth? You have to decide that for yourself. But what I would say is that the moment someone tells you something is truth, is almost that's the time to go, oh, hang on. If someone's telling me something is absolute truth, maybe I should be a little bit skeptical about that. That's just my viewpoint. So why is technology making our lives harder, not easier? Yeah. I mean, I think partly because we as a society are allowing it to. So we sort of see the economic drivers of this technology and progress are about productivity, and it's allowing, it's putting economic productivity and economic efficiency ahead of any other considerations, any sort of welfare for human beings. So I think that so it's driven by AI can do something at the cost of nothing that would otherwise cost money for a human being to do. I think, why in particular is it making our lives harder, not easier? Yeah, I mean, it's just, you're right. I mean, it's a blizzard of data, a blizzard of information, and I think it's because we're allowing it to. I mean, I don't know how often you go for time without your phone. I mean, I dream of. I mean, I'm talking to my wife at the moment. Why don't we have a digital detox for the weekend? We can try and leave our phones behind somewhere, and we can't do it. We can't do it because I'm like, well, no. What about my work? What about my clients? What about I can't? If something happens and I can't do that, and I think there's kind of a cultural thing. I think we need to kind of try to collectively not allow, just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. Just because the technology can do it doesn't mean we should go with it. I think is probably the answer, but it's a cultural thing. It's people are always going to want to use the tech, and the tech is just make. You're right. I mean, think about previously, work was a much more landlines, before email, everything, the pace of everything was much, much slower, which now sounds like a wonderful thing. And technology just makes it impossible to escape, yeah. So a rule from my professional life as a spokesperson that would serve you well in the real world, I think the number one, it sounds very naive, and you may not believe it from a government spokesperson, tell the truth. Tell the truth because for all the reasons you can possibly imagine, even if it's always the best. It's for yourself, for others, and therefore you're happier in yourself with what you're doing and what you're saying, and also people trust you. And I think, it sounds very naive and simplistic, but it's actually also quite a sophisticated thing when you start thinking about it, because in the world of politics, often, and the world of government, sometimes it's quite hard to tell the truth, because the truth is difficult, complicated, people don't want to know the truth, people want, there are forces that want to suppress the truth, and then that creates new problems, because then you're worried about when people find out about the truth, and then you feel bad about it. So I just think a good one for communications in your own life is just tell the truth.